What's happening, everybody? On today's show, more talk leading up to the big games of the weekend in Alabama at Texas A&M and Kentucky at Georgia. We'll also hit on a bunch of other teams with news going on around the conference. And some of our conversation with former Aggie head coach Jackie Sherrill as he gives his thoughts on Texas A&M. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. We got plenty to discuss. Let's do it. Let's go around the conference.
Boots out to the right. Takes the handoff. What a catch!
Around the conference.
And we start over at Texas A&M, as obviously Jimbo Fisher is trying to stay locked in and focused on this game against Alabama this weekend. And Jimbo Fisher talking on the SEC teleconference on Wednesday saying, the narrative is what you want people to perceive of your program. I can't care what other people think or don't know. I haven't asked anybody. But he said he believes this team has the confidence to go out there and win every game, despite what outsiders might be saying about the program. He said the confidence you have within yourself and the belief you have in yourself and what you're doing and what you're standing for, the outside narrative doesn't concern me, and I don't think about it. Now, Jimbo and the Aggies, last time they were in the spot 2 years ago, took down Alabama with the last-second field goal in College Station, and the quarterback that day was Zach Calzada. Jimbo Fisher asked about what he remembers about that game, and Zach Calzada, he said, look, I think he played with great consistency in that game. Anytime you play these kind of games, he said, you always hear me, you got to fight for inches. We got to eliminate their inches. They don't give you things. And if you give them opportunities, man, they're going to capitalize on them. And that's what I say about great teams. So Texas A&M and Alabama, a big one coming up this weekend. Chance for somebody to get into the driver's seat in the SEC West. So that'll be 2:30 Central on CBS from Kyle Field in College Station. We'll see what Max Johnson at quarterback can do for the Aggies offensively. Now over at Alabama, Nick Saban updating on some injured players on his side. He said linebacker Deontay Lawson was able to practice this week. He missed the Mississippi State game last week with an injury. It's been a big part of that defense, 26 tackles, a couple of sacks. So we'll see if Deontay Lawson can play this week. Saban also said O-lineman Terrence Ferguson has been practicing. He suffered an ankle injury against Ole Miss. He missed the Mississippi State game. We'll see if either of those guys are back on Saturday. Now, one of the biggest questions after Saturday's game was about wide receiver Jermaine Burton. He played just 9 snaps last week. On Wednesday, Saban said he's been a little bit banged up. We were trying to spot him in the game and get him through the game if we could. Hopefully, he'll be better this week. Saban also asked about facing a tough offense coordinator, Bobby Petrino, over at Texas A&M. Saban saying he's a great offensive coach. Passing game is sound and solid. They've always been good that way. But I think the combination of Petrino with Jimbo has been very, very productive for them offensively in terms of how they utilize all their players. Asked about his team, Nick kind of said, our team's still a little bit of a work in progress. He said, I think we're getting better every week. Our level of consistency has not been what it needs to be in terms of, he said, I use the term shooting ourselves in the foot a little too much. And if we can eliminate those bad plays, which sometimes we're creating for ourselves, we'll be okay. I think that's the big one here with A&M and Texas and Alabama. Like, who takes care of the football? I think first team to turn the ball over, whoever loses the turnover battle is going to lose this game. It's going to be a really, really close one. I think a defensive battle. I saw that over-under number was at 47, drop it down to 46. A lot of people think that this is going to be a defensive battle on Saturday, and I would agree. All right, ahead of this game, Rick Neuheisel asked about Alabama and A&M. He said what's been amazing about these two teams is that they've fixed a lot of major issues the last couple of weeks. He said for A&M, he said they were woefully defensive against Miami. They gave up 48. Their tackling was abysmal, but they seem to have fixed that with 2 SEC wins since then. He said for Alabama, looked terribly offensively at South Florida and against Ole Miss. but he said they seem to have fixed that in the Mississippi State game. Milroe only had to throw 12 passes, completed 10 of them last week. And while he complimented both, Rick Neuheisel went on to say, I'm going to go back to the Church of Saban, deliver my tithe, and take Alabama in this one, but I'm tipping my cap to both coaches. So Rick Neuheisel going with Vegas, who's got Alabama still as the slight, ever so slight, 2-point favorite over at FanDuel. All right, over at Kentucky, Mark Stoops getting ready for the number one team in the country, Georgia Bulldogs, but he didn't like his team's effort in practice this week. He said, look, I thought we had a decent practice Monday, but we were not up to par on Tuesday. We got to go play the number one team in the country on the road. I think it comes from our players taking care of themselves, being prepared to have a great week, being physical in practice. I've said for weeks, our team is coming together, and you can't deviate from that. When you go play these guys, you better be at your best. Now, Stoops was asked about Carson Beck and what challenges he brings to that offense for Georgia. He said, look, Carson's playing at a really high level, just doing what they're asking him to do, making all the throws, taking care of the football, distributing to their playmakers. I think you could see him gaining confidence, and they're getting better and better. They're getting healthy at running back, getting healthy at wide receiver, and they got playmakers everywhere. Carson Beck averaging around 300 yards passing per game this year, completing 72% of his passes, and he does look to be getting better. And one other note on Kentucky, they did pick up a big recruiting defensive commitment on Wednesday. 4-star edge rusher out of Ohio, Brian Robinson, announced his commitment to Kentucky. He's the number 93 player nationally, according to 24/7 Sports Composite, the number 4 player from the state of Ohio, and the number 7 edge rusher in the class of 2024. 6'5", 255 pounds, gives Kentucky their 22nd commit for the class of 2024. He's their 6th 4-star player, so Mark Stoops doing some work. All right, as for their opponent this week, the Georgia Bulldogs, Kirby Smart talking about Kentucky on Wednesday's teleconference. He said, look, every game is going to be tight with them. They do a good job of shrinking the game. There's not as many plays with the offense identity that they've created. I think they're one of the last in the country in terms of possessions, and they do an unbelievable job of running the football. I think they're the most balanced team maybe in the country in terms of explosiveness. They've got explosive passes, explosive runs at a rate that I don't ever remember being that balanced. They create that. They do a good job. Most of their games end up playing that way. We're going to see what Kentucky can do. That running back Ray Davis coming off a ridiculous career day last week against the Florida Gators. See if he can run the ball on Georgia. Now, for Kirby Smart, he talked about his quarterback Carson Beck. He said, I think when you start talking about national title hopes and put it all on one player, it's a little far-fetched. He said that position's a growth position. Stetson Bennett certainly was more experienced there, and he got better the second go-round than the first. But neither of those wins was because of him, or whether we do or don't this year, it's not because of Carson Beck. There's a lot of things he can do better, but in terms of a clutch gene, there's probably a rating of 1 to 10 there. I don't know if there's a gene that you have it or you don't. Carson Beck, again, continue to play well there for the Georgia Bulldogs. All right, we'll get to more news going on around the conference in just a second. But first, I want to remind you guys, or we'll get to more notes in just a second here on Locked On SEC. All right, we do want to remind you this episode is presented to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Look, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, roll along here, Locked On SEC, and I want to remind you guys, college football season continuing on every Friday on our Locked On YouTube channels. You will find our Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 10 a.m. to noon Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. Every Locked On College YouTube channel will have our college football kickoff live, talking about all the biggest games of the weekend and getting into all the matchups with all of our great Locked On College experts. So go check that out. Wherever you get your podcast, they'll be back this Friday. All right, let's dive back into it as we continue to go around the conference. And we got to get into the Auburn Tigers, as Hugh Freeze was on the SEC teleconference on Wednesday. He was asked about future scheduling. We do have Oklahoma, Texas this weekend. Greg Sankey's going to be there. It's a little weird because it is a Big 12 game, but it's also a future SEC game. And Hugh Freeze asked if he's given any thought to the future scheduling of the conference. Hugh Freeze saying Wednesday, I've given zero thought to it. I know the SEC office and our ADs and presidents will let us know when it's time to have a conversation about those things. None of that has come up to me at this point, other than next year's schedule already being released. Who knows what's going to happen 2 years from now? I said there's a lot of great rivalries that our fans love and our players love, but certainly there's going to be great games added. Should the new scheduling ever miss a year of these great rivalries, that'll be something that obviously be talked about. It doesn't mean there's not going to be great games. Maybe all of our rivalries will be protected. And as for his team, the Auburn Tigers, dealing with a ton of injuries. Hugh Freeze giving an update on several of those guys. He said defensive lineman Mosiah Nasili Kite will miss the remainder of the season with a torn bicep. He suffered in the Georgia game. He had 10 tackles on the year. He also said running back Damari Alston should be expected back in the next couple weeks, maybe as early as LSU. Alston's been out since that A&M game. Wide receiver Javarius Johnson, he's been dealing with a hamstring injury. Missed last week's game. We don't have a timetable for his return yet. Linebacker Austin Keys dealing with that thumb injury since several weeks back. Hugh Freeze saying he's about 3 weeks away from deciding whatever they're going to do with him. And he's hopeful defensive back Keontae Scott will make a return before the end of the year. He's been dealing with an ankle injury since week 3. So, man, Auburn's defense has been playing great this year. It's just that quarterback play got to get better. Peyton Thorne has not lived up to the billing as of yet. All right, over at Arkansas, they're coming off a tough go after their offense stumbled against Texas A&M this past week. KJ Jefferson making an appearance on ESPN Arkansas radio. He said, yeah, it's been pretty frustrating at times, knowing we have a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball. It's football, though. It's a roller coaster. There have been reports that Arkansas is going to make some changes on their offensive line. Patrick Kudus will be playing center. And KJ Jefferson said, look, it's been good so far. He made a couple of adjustments up front. It's working pretty well. I tell him we need to take it one play at a time and build up that confidence. Arkansas going to have a chance to build up some confidence. Could get a big win at Ole Miss this Saturday. It's going to be tough down there in Oxford. But Arkansas, they suffered another blow injury-wise this past week. Their stud freshman tight end Luke Haas suffered a broken clavicle that is likely to keep him out for the remainder of the season. He had 253 yards, 3 touchdowns on the year, was really becoming a nice weapon for KJ Jefferson. Had a big game against LSU 2 weeks ago. And Arkansas is going to have to find a replacement for him. Sam Pittman said, sometimes opportunity, we find out more about a guy than obviously if he's standing over the sidelines. Very comfortable with our tight ends that we have. We might change some because we always do a little bit just trying to attack the defense that we're trying to get ready to play, but very comfortable with how it's gone the last couple of days with Luke not in there. It'll be a tough game, like we said, going into Oxford against Ole Miss. But, man, what a win it would be for Arkansas to bounce back in this one. Sam Pittman did talk about changing out his starting center position. He said, I think Patrick wants to be the center. Obviously makes it a big deal, but I'm comfortable with his first 2 practice days. Think things went well on Monday. He went on to say, we had a little bit more noise at practice. He said that takes a little bit to get used to because it's just different when you clap. You have noise, getting your center ready. It's different than when you just say set, hut. But those are all things that we are continuing to work on there. So there you have it. It's the latest there on Arkansas. All right, how about over at Mizzou? They're coming off of their win over at Vanderbilt. And we know Vanderbilt's been going through those stadium renovations. Well, on Wednesday on the SEC teleconference, could save to Vanderbilt over at First Bank Stadium. He said, look, I'll tell you guys this. That temporary locker room they have set up is as anybody's normal locker room in the SEC. Got some names out there, little Twitter war, but we've done through this construction is really good. Drinkwood said it's hard to cast stones in this league because so many different schools have gone through construction projects during the season, and now it's just Vanderbilt's opportunity to do that. He said, so it is what it is, but didn't have any effect on the game, but I would like to commend them for the way that they set up those locker rooms, the visitors' locker room. Yeah, if you missed it, it's like air-conditioned trailers, but the pictures we saw, like if you didn't know any different, it looks like you're in a fully constructed locker room. It doesn't look like it's a temporary trailer, but air-conditioned and felt nice, according to people that have used it. Also at Missouri, Eli Drinkwitz, he's got one of the best wide receivers, not just in the SEC, but in the country, Luther Burden, and he has had a monster year. Over 600 yards, 5 touchdowns already. Eli Drinkwitz asked about Luther Burden and what he's been like this year and developing confidence. He said, look, Luther's always been the best player on his team, and when he got here, he was dinged up. He had an injury, had to fight through it. I wasn't necessarily having the success that maybe he thought he was going to have. And he said, you know what? Sometimes you got to face adversity. You got to respond. The way he responded has elevated his level of success and his play. He's an elite practice player. And I think that's translated to the performance he's had on the field. I think it's because he faced adversity, overcame it, and gained confidence. Luther Burden probably licking his chops looking at playing LSU this weekend because their secondary, no bueno. They have been suffering. Gave up a ton of yards, 700 total yards to Ole Miss last week. Speaking of LSU, they do have a good offense on their side too, and that's maybe what Brian Kelly is hoping for. Maybe they get into a shootout with Missouri and Brady Cook. But his quarterback, Jaden Daniels, having a phenomenal year, and a lot of it is the success he's having with his OC, Mike Denbrock. Brian Kelly on the coaches' teleconference Wednesday said, I think a lot of that happens in the offseason in terms of getting opportunity in the spring and the winter months and keeping that cohesiveness with Jaden Daniels back with the OC. He said, I think when you go into year 2, you have the ability to kind of rehash the first year where Coach Denbrock and Jaden could sit down and, hey, here were some things we really liked. Here were some things we're really comfortable with. They said that's where you start to see some of the nuances of the offense come together. But LSU's offense, no doubt, they are hitting on all cylinders. And it's a shame that their defense has played so poorly because Jaden Daniels has played so well. His name would be getting thrown around in the Heisman competition if LSU were undefeated right now. But still a lot of season to go. We'll see how this plays out. Brian Kelly was asked about their run game. They ran the ball a good bit last week in the loss to Ole Miss, and he said, look, I think it's absolutely crucial for any real good offense. You got to run the football. He said it sets up so much of what you want to do in terms of taking shots down the field, controlling short yardage, down and distance, things of that nature. He said, so, yeah, it's absolutely intentional, and I've always felt philosophically I never want to be one-dimensional on offense. I want to have that ability to be equally effective. LSU has rushed for almost 1,000 yards on the season, over 1,700 receiving yards on the year. See what they do against Mizzou. It's an early one in Como Saturday morning. One more note on LSU. Their safety, Greg Brooks, had a brain tumor removed last month. You guys might remember us mentioning that, but LSU announced on Wednesday that the safety has been diagnosed with a rare form of brain cancer, medulloblastoma. LSU announced they are offering support for Greg Brooks through the Greg Brooks Jr. Victory Fund as he continues to battle. Greg Brooks, of course, started his career over at Arkansas, transferred over to LSU last season where he started, I think, just about every game for LSU last year, had a couple interceptions, and played in the games earlier this year before suffering bouts of vertigo and went to go get checked out, turned out to be a brain tumor. So awful news there for Greg Brooks. Wishing him the best. And if you guys want to contribute to Greg Brooks Jr. Victory Fund over there on LSU's website. All right, over at Vandy, Clark Lee. They had to start quarterback Ken Seals this past week in the loss to Mizzou, and a lot of questions about his starting quarterback, A.J. Swan. Is he healthy? Is he going to play this week? Clark Lee said Wednesday, the word I've used is available. He'll be available on Saturday to play. He said, I think it's more along the lines I don't have concerns about him getting re-injured. It's more performance, though. So I think the ability to practice at a high level, one of the things that's been missing for us offensively is just chemistry on the field. He said, look, Swan's a young quarterback. He started 11 games. He's 19 years old. Can't really treat him like a vet yet. He said, we're monitoring his elbow and the strain there and just seeing where he is available for practice. He said, we also recognize Ken Seals came in and performed well in that role this past week. So as we work to get AJ back comfortable and confident, we know we got a guy we can lean on and Ken if we need to. So doesn't sound like we have a clear picture on if AJ Swan's going to play this week or if it'll be Ken Seals, but we'll see one of them out there as the Commodores take on Florida, facing off against Florida after back-to-back losses to Kentucky and Missouri. They'll be down in Gainesville Saturday afternoon. All right, over at Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin and the Rebels, their big win over LSU last week. Their athletic director, Keith Carter, took to the podium this week to talk about the field storming by the Ole Miss students following the win. He said, as our program continues to experience big wins like Saturday, our fans should be more accustomed to these moments and hopefully avoid field storming situations in the future. Lane Kiffin on Wednesday said, yeah, usually the fan thing is a product of not just winning a big game, but winning it at the end of it, like the Tennessee-Alabama game a year ago. He said, especially if you're coming from behind, like our game last week, there's so much excitement. But he said, whatever our AD said, I agree with him. The Rebels taking on Arkansas this week in Oxford. Lane Kiffin talking about one of his big wide receiver weapons, Trey Harris. He said he thinks he's one of the top receivers in the country. So what's awesome is I don't think he was fully healthy on Saturday. I think when he is, he's one of the best receivers in the entire country. So his touchdown percentages by play time are off the charts, whatever it is, 16 catches to 6 touchdowns or something like that. It's ridiculous. He said it's been really encouraging, and he's been a big part of our offense. On Saturday, Harris had 153 yards and a touchdown on just 8 catches. Again, Ole Miss versus Arkansas this weekend. Now, Ole Miss made headlines on Wednesday for another negative reason. So, of course, they were fined $100,000 by the SEC for their fans storming the field. Well, they had another ugly incident during the game where they called an LSU touchdown on the field. It was reviewed and kind of looked like the receiver, I think it was Brian Thomas, he kind of didn't secure the catch until he was out of bounds. Well, they reviewed it and said the touchdown would stand. And Rebel fans were angry. They booed and ended up throwing trash onto the field. They were throwing bottles and cans and beers and all kinds of stuff. And Greg Sankey issuing a statement on Wednesday saying the disruption and delay of Saturday night's game must never be a part of an SEC event. He said these actions are consistent with the oversight assigned by the membership to the SEC office, including the financial penalty and mandated reviews. The SEC is going to deduct $75,000 from the program's share of conference revenue distribution as a result. Yeah, if you missed it, stuff were being thrown, objects were being thrown, and they had to stop play for a little while. Brian Kelly went out there, was yelling at the refs and all this kind of stuff. So I get it, but Greg Sankey's quote ringing pretty deep there. The disruption and delay of Saturday night's game must never be a part of any SEC event. All right, other news over at Mississippi State, Zach Arnett, he was asked about if he's had a chance to reflect on what it's like being the head coach so far at Mississippi State. He said, look, I'll be honest with you. I don't think that's a good or fair question right now in the middle of the season, because to me, those are things you reflect on at the end of the season. Right now, he said, you're just so go, preparing for the next game. It's hard to give a thorough, in-depth answer there. Zach Arnett off to a 2-3 start. They do get a respite this week playing Western Michigan. Should be a win for them. Over Tennessee, Josh Heupel talking with reporters on Wednesday, talking about the loss of wide receiver Brew McCoy, and are they going to have a hard time replacing him? Heupel said, look, I wouldn't say it's a concern. We work those fundamentals with all of our guys inside of our program, really every single day that we're on the grass. So no doubt, Brew is a special player. His level of physicalness, whether he's blocking on the perimeter or has the ball in his hands, he was very special. It was a big part of what we did offensively. You hate seeing an injury like that sustained. He said the next guys are going to have to step up. Said the other night, Caleb Webb did some really good things. Dante Thornton wasn't available last week. We anticipate he'll be ready for the A&M game. It's going to be a handful of guys who will step up and fill that role. The Vols are on a bye this week. They will get ready for Texas A&M coming up after their Week 6 battle against Alabama the next Saturday. So one more tidbit over at Florida. Billy Napier and the Gators 3-2 on the season. Napier asked about the lack of continuity on his O-line. He said, I do think continuity is important with that unit. If you could have the same 5 in the same roles, there could be some chemistry there. There's a lot of communication. It's a lot of work relative to the combination blocks. Things happen fast in there. He said, one thing we've lacked so far this year is just all that continuity up front. So we do have some tough guys that have been banged up. They've been limited. We're hopeful at some point we'll settle in and get that offensive line going. Florida will look to avoid a losing streak when they host Vanderbilt on Saturday. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Coming up next, a little bit of our conversation with the head coach, Jackie Sherrill from Texas A&M. That's coming your way in just a sec. Catching up with Coach Jackie Sherrill. And Coach, let me get your thoughts on the Aggies, the year they're having so far. Stubbed their toe a little bit in Miami, but Jimbo seems to have gotten them back on track.
Well, what you saw from the first two games and what the game at Auburn, you saw that some young running backs that started emergency. And because of Connor, the quarterback, and even Johnson, the backup quarterback, you can have great receivers like Evans and Smith, but you need running backs to be able to offset, and that's the difference of the Auburn game going back. If the running backs in Miami at the Miami game had played like they played in Auburn, that game may have been completely different.
It is interesting, Connor, with the ankle injury, but Max Johnson seemed to come in and execute the offense just as well. Is that important? A backup quarterback just always has to be ready?
Absolutely. I mean, even in pro ball, you see when you lose the starter and if the backup is not ready to play. But Max is not a youngster. Mac has had a good career at LSU. He transferred basically to play with his brother. And this past Saturday, he and his brother got to do something that brothers don't get are not able to do, is, catch that touchdown pass.
How would you have liked to coach so many 4 and 5 stars on that defense? I think you would have liked to coach those guys, right?
Well, we had a pretty good defense at A&M when I was there. So, the wrecking crew was but these defensive linemen, there's a lot of football left for them because they're going to be playing on Sunday somewhere.
What do they feed these kids nowadays? My goodness.
Well, they're not small today. Of course, you look at Richmond Webb here, they wasn't small back then either.
One more for you. There's been so much talk of the SEC with some of these non-conference losses. People saying the SEC is down. In your opinion, is it down, or is it just kind of the regression to the mean with transfer portal and all this kind of stuff?
Well, the transfer portal, if you look at the top Heisman Trophy considerates, every one of them are transfers. So the transfer portal has changed college football, and it will continue to change. However, the teams are still there. Georgia's still there. Ohio State's still there. So you can go on and on. I've in the Southeast Conference, Alabama's still there. So, who's going to win at the end? If you had to put a gun to my head, you'd have to say, Alabama or Georgia, but I wouldn't. There are 2 or 3 other teams that you can't count out of. You look at Kentucky. Kentucky's undefeated. So every Saturday you play in the SEC, the chances of winning is not as good as other conferences of their top teams.
One more for you. Wild Kirby Smart, back-to-back championships, a chance for 3 in a row. But I saw he just coached his 100th game, and he's got a higher winning percentage than the Bear, Nick Saban. I mean, pretty ridiculous what that guy's doing.
Well, Kirby's done a great job. But you go back and look at his path, meaning who did he play for at Georgia? How good were they? Were good, no question. Then who did he coach for? And he was under Nick. Kirby has taken himself, meaning what he learned as a player and what he has learned as a coach, and he has put those two together. And he has a great staff now. And that's one thing that we really don't understand. You can be a great coach, but you better have a great staff. Kirby does. Same thing with Saban. Saban's always had a great staff.
Coach, thank you so much for the time.
You're welcome.
All right, that again, our conversation with head coach Jackie Sherrill. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. Everydayers, come on back and check us out. We'll be back here tomorrow making our official picks heading into a big weekend of SEC football. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked on SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.